My aunt faked cancer to get my inheritance early, so I showed up at her fake fundraiser with the real hospital records. She said, "Don't ruin this for me." I said, "You already did." I was 21 when my mom died of cancer, the kind of slow, cruel ending that stretches out for months until grief becomes routine. I watched her wither in front of me. I held her hand through treatments, through hair loss, through days where she couldn't speak but still tried to smile. By the time she passed, I wasn't just heartbroken, I was hollow. She was all I had. No siblings, no other parent, just her, and suddenly, not even that. She left me everything. The small house we lived in, her aging car, a modest savings account she had quietly built up by clipping coupons, working overtime, and skipping every luxury for as long as I could remember. It was never a fortune, but to me, it was sacred. It was hers, a final act of love, meant to keep me standing while I figured out how to keep going. I was still in college then, still half a kid, trying to finish papers in between sobbing breakdowns and financial aid meetings. That's when she showed up. My Aunt Teresa, my mom's younger sister, loud, charming, the type of person who always had a story and always needed something. She swept in like a whirlwind after the funeral, casserole in one hand, unsolicited advice in the other. She made herself comfortable fast, sitting on my couch with wine, telling me how much my mother adored me, how she always knew you'd be the strong one. She told stories that made me laugh through tears, and for a moment, I felt like I had someone. Like maybe, in this sea of emptiness, I wasn't completely alone. But Teresa had a way of speaking that left a trail. At first, it was small things, offhand comments about the house, questions about the estate lawyer. "You're really handling all that on your own?" she'd ask, like concern was laced with something else. Then came the suggestion that maybe my mom had intended for her to have something too. "Your mom and I always talked about sharing things, you know. She'd hate for me to be struggling while you've got so much on your plate." I didn't push back. I was grieving. I wanted to believe the best in her. Then, over coffee one quiet morning, she dropped it. "I didn't want to say anything before, but I've been diagnosed stage 3 ovarian cancer." Her eyes welled up with tears. Her voice cracked. She spoke in broken pieces: chemotherapy, out-of-network doctors, medication costs. And then she looked at me, shaking her head, saying she hated to ask, hated it, but she was out of options. I thought maybe, just a little help. "In your mom's name." It hit me like a punch. I could barely breathe. My mom had just died of cancer, and now her sister, the only family I had left, was telling me she had it too. What kind of monster would say no to that? So I didn't. I wrote her a check. And then another. And another. And I didn't ask questions. Not yet. For a while, I kept telling myself it was fine. Teresa said the money helped. That her chemo was experimental and not covered. That the bills were piling up and the stress was hurting her immune system. She told me about nausea, fatigue, late-night ER trips. I sent money without hesitation: rent here, utilities there, even a few hundred just to help cover gas for appointments. I was still grieving, still raw. And watching her put on a brave face, with scarves around her head, exaggerated sighs, constant reminders that the pain was bad today, made it easier to believe she was telling the truth. That maybe this was the universe's sick joke, losing my mother and now watching her sister fight the same thing. But little cracks started showing. She never lost weight. Never seemed tired. She'd post photos on social media from weekend getaways, wine tastings, and dinners out with friends. No hospital bracelets. No 4 bruises. Always dressed to the nines, lipstick perfect, nails done, laughing into the camera like she had nothing in the world to worry about. I tried to silence the voice in my head. Told myself maybe she had good days. Maybe she didn't want to share the hard stuff online. Maybe it was all true and I was just bitter and exhausted and overthinking. Then came the fundraiser. She called it Hope for Teresa. A public event at the local community hall. Live music, raffle prizes, a catered dinner, a silent auction. Posters with her face on them. Fighting for her life. She sent me a link to the Eventbrite page and added, "I'd love for you to speak." Just a few words about how hard this has been for the family. That's when something in me snapped. Speak? On a stage? About a battle I wasn't even sure was real? I stared at the invite, heart racing. It didn't make sense. Who has the energy, or the budget, to throw a full-scale fundraising gala while supposedly undergoing aggressive chemo? And how had she put this all together so fast? The shirts, the posters, the RSVP website, the custom menu? I texted her one night asking which hospital she was being treated at, told her I wanted to send a thank you to her doctors. She left me on read. The next day, she sent a long paragraph about how emotionally taxing this has been and how I shouldn't press her for details. That she didn't owe anyone proof. That I needed to trust her. But I didn't. Not anymore. So I picked up the phone and started calling hospitals. Just to confirm. Just to quiet the voice in my head. I started with the big ones, the Regional Cancer Center, the University Hospital, the private oncology clinic in the city. Every call started the same. Hi, I'm trying to verify if a patient named Teresa, last name, is receiving treatment at your facility. Every answer was the same. No one by that name has ever been treated here. I made 8 calls in one day. 8 no's. By the time I hung up the phone, my hands were shaking. It wasn't a voice in my head anymore. It was a fact. She lied. I wanted to be wrong. That was the sickest part. I wasn't hoping to catch Teresa in a lie. I was hoping all those hospital phone calls, all the no patient by that name responses, were some huge misunderstanding. Maybe she used a different name. Maybe she was in a private trial program. Maybe I just didn't understand how medical systems worked. Because the alternative, that she faked cancer to steal from me, wasn't something I could wrap my mind around. Not yet. But the moment I sat in my lawyer's office, saying those words out loud for the first time, I think my aunt might be lying about her diagnosis to get access to my inheritance, I felt everything shift. The tone. The stakes. The part of me that still wanted to protect her began to shrink. My lawyer didn't even blink. He'd seen worse, apparently. Family stealing from family wasn't new. But this was different. Teresa hadn't just asked for help. She'd constructed an identity, a whole illness, and wrapped it in just enough emotion to make me feel guilty if I ever questioned it. He leaned back in his chair and said, if she's receiving financial benefit from you under false medical pretenses, and she's tying that to your late mother's estate, we can absolutely pursue documentation, and if necessary, fraud charges. That word of fraud hit harder than I expected. He wasn't talking about a misunderstanding. He was talking about a crime. We filed paperwork that same day. It was a formal request for medical verification related to financial involvement, basically, an attempt to protect my legal interests as someone who had provided monetary support based on alleged medical claims. I didn't know you could even do something like that without being a spouse or legal guardian, but because Teresa had tied her requests directly to the estate my mom left me, and because there was an active fundraiser in my name listed on the event page, I had standing. What followed was 2 weeks of silence. No word from Teresa. No update from the hospital records office. I spent those days swinging between anxiety and fury. Every time I opened social media, there she was there posting selfies in boutiques, asking people to share her fundraiser flyer, talking about hope and strength like she was starring in some inspirational Lifetime movie. And every time I looked at her face, I remembered mine, younger, raw, sitting next to my mom's hospital bed while her fingers curled from chemo cramps. I remembered my mother vomiting, weeping, whispering, "Don't let this define you," and how I'd nodded through tears, promising I'd keep her memory safe. Teresa wasn't just lying. She was selling my mother's death. Then the envelope came. I picked it up from the lawyer's office, a thick packet in a large manila envelope marked confidential. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hold the pen when I signed for it. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I opened it. 10 pages. 10 clean, official pages of her medical records from the last 2 years. I read every word, carefully, twice. There were no test results. No biopsies. No surgery notes. No prescriptions. No chemo. No radiation. No oncology consults. Nothing. The only visits were for a sprained wrist, a sinus infection, and a flu shot. That was it. No cancer. No treatment. Not even a false positive. She had never been sick. She had lied from the very beginning. And I had paid for the lie in every way, financially, emotionally, spiritually. I had grieved with her. Sat with her. Believed her. I had handed her pieces of my mother's legacy thinking I was helping someone fight for their life. She wasn't fighting. She was collecting. I took a deep breath, folded the papers carefully, and slid them back into the envelope. This wasn't just going to be a private confrontation. Not anymore. Not after all the people she'd lied to. Not after the fundraiser she was hosting in my mom's name. Not after the tears she cried in my living room, holding my hands, pretending to be brave. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to make a scene. I was going to tell the truth. And I was going to do it on her stage. The night of the fundraiser, I arrived early. Not because I wanted to be there, but because I needed to see it. To feel what she had done. Teresa had rented the town's community center, the same place we'd held my mom's memorial reception less than a year before. The irony wasn't lost on me. The parking lot was already half full when I pulled in. There were signs posted along the walkway, each with a black and white photo of Teresa smiling bravely, arms crossed over a lavender ribbon. Hope for Teresa was printed in bold letters beneath her face, followed by a quote, "Some battles are invisible. But no less real." There were donation boxes on every table. Raffle prizes displayed against the wall. Volunteers wearing matching t-shirts with her face screen-printed over their chests. A slideshow of her journey played on a projector in the background, stock hospital images, blurry selfies she must have taken in waiting rooms to sell the illusion. Every detail had been crafted to build the image of a woman fighting for her life. And the worst part? People believed it. I saw old neighbors hugging her. Friends from church handing her envelopes. People tearing up as they complimented her strength. She moved through the room like a politician, gracious, glowing, soaking in every ounce of sympathy like it was oxygen. I stood quietly at the back of the room, envelope in hand. I didn't approach her. Not yet. I wanted her to feel safe. Confident. I wanted her to look out at this room full of believers and think, I did it. I got away with it. I waited until the music faded and the lights dimmed for her speech. She stepped up to the mic, brushing her curls back, clearing her throat like she was about to perform a monologue. She started slow, soft. She thanked everyone for being there. Talked about the uncertainty, the fear of not knowing if tomorrow will come, and how faith had carried her through the darkest moments. I could see people wiping tears. And then she held up a framed photo of my mom, my mother, and said, "She's the reason I keep going." That's when I moved. I walked up the side aisle, calmly, and stepped onto the edge of the stage. She paused when she saw me. Her expression flickered, the briefest flash of panic behind her carefully painted smile. She tried to keep talking, but her voice cracked. I stepped up to the mic and gently placed my hand over hers. "Before anyone gives another $1 tonight," I said, "I think you deserve to know the truth." Gasps. A few confused murmurs. Teresa went rigid beside me. She tried to say something, I think it was my name, but I held up the envelope. Inside were 10 pages of hospital documents. Official letterhead. Dates. Signatures. No diagnosis. No chemo. No cancer. I had made copies and placed them in a small stack. "This is her full medical record," I said. "There's no cancer. There never was." The silence in the room was thunderous. One woman stood up from her table. Another looked at the donation box in front of her like it had started to rot. Teresa stepped back, clutching the mic with both hands. "She's lying," she said, her voice suddenly higher, shrill. "This is a violation. She hacked me. This is harassment." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at her. I just kept addressing the crowd. She's taken money from people under false pretenses. From me, from many of you, and from my mother's memory. I don't care what she says now. The records speak for themselves. Someone in the back of the room whispered, "Oh my God." The DJ cut the music. A volunteer unplugged the projector. The slideshow stopped mid-frame, Teresa's smiling face frozen behind her like a ghost watching its own funeral. I turned to leave. Teresa grabbed my arm. Her voice dropped to a hiss, barely audible. "Don't ruin this for me." I looked her straight in the eyes, and for the first time, I saw her without the performance, no tears, no trembling, no illness to hide behind. Just a woman caught. I pulled my arm away. "You already did," I said. And I walked out. I didn't need to see the aftermath to know it would be messy. The crowd behind me was already shifting, whispering, pulling out phones. Teresa had spent months building a lie brick by brick. I had just knocked out the foundation. I didn't turn around after I left the stage. I didn't need to. I stepped out into the night air and let the door close behind me, sealing the sound of confused murmurs and rustling folding chairs. My heart was pounding, but not out of fear. It was relief. Like finally exhaling after holding my breath for months. The moment I had dreaded for so long, confronting Teresa publicly, hadn't been explosive or violent. It had just been true. And truth doesn't need to yell. I drove home in silence, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled with music or thoughts. I didn't check my phone. I didn't call anyone. I just sat in the quiet, the envelope of records still in the passenger seat, like a weight I'd finally carried to its destination. By the next morning, it had already started. 3 missed calls. 2 voicemails. A dozen texts. All from people I hadn't heard from in years, old family friends, distant cousins, community members I barely knew. Some were apologetic. Some were stunned. Some just said, "Is it true?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The records had done the talking. Later that day, someone forwarded me screenshots from the fundraiser's Facebook page. The comments had turned from prayers and purple ribbons to disbelief and quiet fury. Donors asking where their money had gone. One person posted a screenshot of the medical records I had shared, along with the caption, "We've been scammed." The fundraiser was shut down within 24 hours. The donations were frozen. The event page was deleted. Some people demanded refunds. Others just blocked her and moved on. It wasn't dramatic. It was slow and humiliating. Like watching someone sink into a mess they created with no one left willing to throw a rope. I heard Teresa tried to spin it afterward, said I was bitter, mentally unstable, jealous of her support system. That I was disrespecting my mother's memory by creating family drama. But her usual tactics didn't land the way they used to. Because this time, she wasn't operating in the shadows. This time, she was exposed. And the sympathy dried up fast. One by one, the people who once rallied around her stopped answering her calls. Her inner circle dissolved. The woman who once moved through every room with ease now had nowhere left to go without seeing the quiet side eyes of people who knew better. I didn't press charges. I thought about it. The lawyer said I had a case, not just for fraud, but for emotional damages. But honestly, I didn't want her dragged into court. I didn't want headlines or courtroom tears or a public apology that would only come because she got caught. I didn't need revenge. Because this slow unraveling of her lies in front of the very people she fooled, was already justice. She tried texting me once. Just one word. Why? I never answered. What was there to say? She knew why. She just never thought I'd stop playing along. Life didn't change overnight after the fundraiser. There were no victory laps, no cinematic endings. Just space, the kind that slowly opens up when you stop waiting for people to apologize, or change, or act like you matter more than they ever planned to show. For the first time in almost a year, my grief was quiet. It wasn't silenced. It wasn't gone. But it wasn't constantly colliding with betrayal anymore. I could finally sit in the memory of my mother without feeling the acid burn of Teresa's manipulation. That alone felt like healing. I started reclaiming things, little by little. I took the framed photo of my mother that Teresa had held up during her speech, the one she used as a prop, and placed it back on my desk where it belonged. I went through the kitchen drawer where I'd once stored donation receipts and sympathy notes, shredded what didn't matter, and filed the rest under lessons I paid for in full. I gave myself permission to move forward. Not in a dramatic, Instagram quote way, but in real, human ways. I enrolled in a graduate program using what remained of my inheritance, the money my mother left behind, with so much faith that I'd use it wisely. I joined a volunteer group that supports families of real cancer patients. I attended one meeting just to sit quietly. The second time, I spoke. And when I spoke, it wasn't about Teresa. It was about my mother. I told them about her hands, how they stayed warm, even near the end. About the way she still made jokes during chemo, about the recipes she wrote on napkins, about the nights she stayed awake worrying about me instead of herself. I didn't talk about betrayal. I talked about love. About how grief doesn't always look like tears, sometimes, it looks like learning how to breathe again without guilt. People listened. And then they clapped. Not for drama. Not for justice. But for a daughter finally speaking freely, with no one trying to steal the mic. Months passed. I never heard from Teresa again. She moved away, I think. The family doesn't talk about her much anymore. The ones who mattered reached out, quietly, respectfully. The ones who didn't faded into the background where they belonged. But my mother? She stayed with me. In the mirror. In my voice. In the strength I didn't realize I had until I had no choice but to use it. Her legacy wasn't what she left behind in a will. It was me. And no one, not even family, gets to rewrite that.